Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashisya krimat vivaranasya cha. So today we are going to introduce a very important topic, which is special contribution of Patanjali. Patanjali discusses one very common problem that frequently we confront in philosophy and also psychology. Why do we behave the way we behave? And why is there so much of diversity, plurality in creation? At one level, you find all human beings are made the same, physically speaking. All of us have got 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 eyes, 2 ears, and so on. So there are many physical aspects, even psychological aspects, in which human beings are more or less the same, almost identical. But then there is so much of diversity. In the same family, there may be 5 children. All of them may be brought up the same way, same education, same training, but still may belong to 5 different categories, 5 different characteristics. So how do we explain this discrepancy, this contradiction, this mystery of life, this manifoldness, this plurality and diversity? Of course, there are many doctrines put forward, but modern science and psychology have not been able to solve this problem. Now, Patanjali puts forward one important doctrine, which he calls karma shaya, it is called. So, karma shaya is nothing but a sum total of all the residual effects of all actions, all karmas that we have performed, not only in this life, but in innumerable past lives. All actions, all thought currents, all ideas and concepts and words that we have spoken or thought about or acted upon, not only in this life, but also in previous life, come together and they converge together and they form a particular entity which Patanjali calls karma shaya. In a way, the sum total of all the residual effects of our karmas, thoughts, actions. So, it is a collective group or samuha, sometimes called samudaya. Now, according to Patanjali's system, yoga and also Vedanta, every action, whether good action or bad action, produces 2 kinds of effects. Here, action doesn't necessarily mean a physical action. So, karma, the word means not only action, because that's what you find in the Mourner-Williams or any dictionary. Karma is action. And when we use the word action, we always mean some kind of physical engagement. Now, the word karma in Patanjali system has got much wider implications. If a thought is a karma, a flashing impulse, an idea that suddenly emerges in the mind and disappears is a karma. A word we speak cannot exist or emerge in a void. The word should, first of all, should emerge as an idea in mind, as thought, and then that thought undergoes the process called verbalization, and that again may lead to a corresponding physical engagement, which we normally understand by the word karma or action. So karma means anything, any movement, any engagement of word, deed, thought, or action, or anything. Now, this karma has got two different manifestations, two kinds of effects. One is at the individual level, the individual effects. For example, when we do something, that action produces a samskara in the mind of the person who is doing that work. We can never do anything, we can never think of an idea without producing some kind of a samskara or a vritti in the mind. Its subtle form is called samskara, its grosser dimension is called vritti, and it again prompts us to repeat that kind of action which produce this vritti or samskara. So one is at the individual level, the effect of an action on the doer, on the person who is actually responsible for the action, who does that work. So this may be sometimes called klesha or vasana. When we do something that influences our character, that either negatively or positively can have an effect on our character. And this character again will prompt us to do action accordingly. So this is the micro dimension, microcosmic dimension of karma. This is one. The other is a cosmic effect in the form of a karmic residue, which is sometimes known as apurva, adrishta, and it's also called karmasya. I can explain this. Apurva literally in Sanskrit means that which did not exist before it came into existence. Adrishta means the invisible. And karmasya means a collective group of the residual effects of actions. Now, according to yoga, this karmic residue determines a person's life, not only in this life, but also in future life. So, at one level, these actions together produce a cosmic effect, which we sometimes call destiny. The other one is its immediate, almost visible or experienceable effect in our character, which is called samskara or vasanas. Now, these are diverse and different from person to person. Each person is born with a bag full of his own or her own samskaras, vasanas, vrittis. In other words, a bag which contains karmasya, which is at the back of his existence. This karmasya sometimes can function in a very, very strange manner. Patanjali, in one context, says, Sati mule tat vipago jati ayur bhoga. He says in the 13th sutra, he says, if the root cause is klesha, and klesha is related to some psychological obstruction or problem or phenomenon, which is the result of some action we have done sometime in the past. Then what happens? This karmasya takes fruition in the form of birth, span of life, and experiences in this life. So all that we experience is nothing but the result of this karmasya. I must tell you at this stage that it is not predeterminism, or sometimes called, the doctrine of predestinarianism. There was an ancient school of philosophers in India. They flourished right from 15th century BC onwards, and later when Jaina religion became popular, they also took up some of these ideas. It is called again a predeterminism. Sometimes it used to be called yadrichavada. Everything is destiny. Everything is predetermined. Sometimes people used to say, well, if you ask the question, why is the fire hot? There is no reason other than because it is hot or heat is its nature. It's not an explanation. So everything is predetermined. There is no rule for any of us to do anything in this world. This karmasya doctrine is the opposite of that, because frequently karma doctrine is interpreted as some kind of cold-blooded predeterminism. It is not at all so. That's what we are going to deal with. Then we will deal with some other aspects related to this. So, one point is that it is not predeterminism. If we can understand it this way, that it is not predeterminism, rather if we understand that we behave in a particular manner, then it's because we have accumulated a series of residual effects of actions that we have already done in the past. So, in one of the sutras, Patanjali makes an interesting statement. Klesha mulaha karmasyo drishta adrishta janma vedaniya. What he means is this. The residual effect of this karma, which constitutes karma shaya, which is actually caused by kleshas, is to be experienced either in this life or in innumerable lives to come. This is a sutra, this is 12th sutra of the sadhana part. It says, Klesha mulaha karmasyu drishta adrishta janma vedaniya. So whatever we have done in the past is to be experienced either in this life or in the next life, in the life to come. Now, again, it is not predeterminism. I can only explain this point in the light of with the help of a narrative from some of our other scriptures. In the Gita, there is a statement. Antakale smaran bhavam tyajatyante kalevaram tam tamevaiti kaunteya sada madbhava bhavitaha. This is a statement from Gita. Maybe it comes in the 8th chapter of 6th verse. Antakale smaran bhavam tyajatyante kalevaram. How you leave this body at the time of death. That determines your future life. You obtain a destiny, a rebirth, according to the thoughts, the idea that you have in your mind at the time of death when you breathe the last. This is the verse. Now, Ramanuja was a great Vaishnavite interpreter of Bhagavad Gita. He says, and he makes a very strong statement, suppose we do whatever we want in our life, without caring for dharma, virtues, truthfulness, morality, or ethics, or spiritual values. Do whatever we want. Oh, at the time of death, I would rather think of God. That is a very clever way of looking upon the whole phenomenon. So we can have all the best things in a very worldly sense, all the worldly pleasures. And then at the time of death, we can think of God. Ramanuja says it cannot happen. The thought with which we leave this body, with which we breathe our last, we close our eyes, is the sum total is completely dependent upon of whatever we have done when we were healthy, when we were living. So the sum total of all the actions that we have done, all the thoughts we have thought, all the words we have spoken, all the ideas and concepts that have gone through our mind in our life is a sum total. Because when the body becomes weak, when our own mind, our own thought currents are not within our power, our control, then our natural state will throw up. And that natural state will be the sum total of all the actions that we have done in the past. Or it will be determined by how we have lived our life. Ramanuja's commentary for your information is interesting. Ante antakale yam yam va api bhavam smaran kalevaram tyajadi tam tam bhavam eva maranantaram eti antapratyayascha purvabhavida vishaya eva jayate. It's called antyapratyaya. Antyapratyaya means the thought that comes to your mind when you are leaving this body. Antyapratyayascha purvabhavida vishaya eva jayate. What is antyapratyaya? Pratyaya. The thought current that comes to the mind when we are leaving this body. The last thought current. It is purvabhavida vishaya. Means it must be something that we have already experienced in the past. We cannot all of a sudden think a new thought when the mind is weak, when we are leaving this body. So that's why antyapratyaya purvabhavida vishaya. It should be an idea or a thought that we must have experienced in the past. Only something that we had experienced in the past will come to the surface at the time of death as antyapratyaya, means the thought that comes at the end of human existence. This is interesting thing. Now, this is a distinct, rather it's a unique contribution of Patanjali. The concept of klesha, the distinction between samskara and vritti, and also the concept of karmashaya. In fact, modern psychiatrists like psychologists like Jung and Adler, they speak about some things closely resembling what we call vrittis, impressions. But vrittis or impressions or modifications are nothing but the grosser dimension of these residual effects of actions in the past that we have done in the past. There's a subtle aspects of what we have done in the past, which have not become a vritti or an impression. Vrittis and impressions follow actions. But samskaras have not yet produced an action, but have a strong potency to produce an action. So that means if we have accumulated samskaras, impressions, through thoughts and ideas or through actions in the past, those samskaras alone will come to the surface as andya pratyaya, as Ramanuja used. Means the last thought, the last impulse, the last mental impression that comes to the surface. That's an idea, an important contribution of Patanjali. There are a few more sutras which will contribute, which are complementary to this idea. To drive home this idea of karmashaya and also its real practical implication in spiritual life, I can just refer to another interesting episode from the same scripture. It's from Bhagavata Purana. In Bhagavata Purana, there is an interesting story. The story of a young man, rather he has become middle-aged. His name is Ajamila. Ajamila Upakhyanam, the story of Ajamila. He was born in a good pious family, His parents were God-fearing, pious people. So they brought him up well. He led a good life when he was a small boy or a child. And he used to meditate upon God. He used to read holy scriptures. So he had accumulated a lot of good samskaras, good impressions. But when he reached his advanced youth stage of when he was about 30 years or so, he had a deviation. He had a fall from the way of disciplined life in which he was brought up. So he started leading a wayward life, indisciplined life, as a vagabond, without caring for ethical, moral values. And he did all that a person should not do, and did nothing that a person ought to do. So nothing more need to be said about him. He was the embodiment of all the vices. He did nothing that he should have done, and he did everything that he should never have done. Now, what happened? He became old, not very old, because he didn't have the health to live a long life. So he was about to die. And then he called his son. His son's name was the same as the name that is given to God in the Vaishnava tradition. Narayana is the name. Narayanam Ayanam Yasya. That means the ultimate destination of all human spiritual pursuits. That's the real meaning of the word Narayana. Narayanam Ayanam means that should be the ultimate spiritual goal. So Vishnu, Narayana, means a Sanskrit synonym for God. So his son's name was Narayana. So when a person who had led such a miserable life, he felt that there was nobody near him. He was completely depressed. He was upset. Nobody to take care of him. All those friends, all those whom he accepted as his friends, they all deserted him because they were moving with him only for his money or to exploit him. So he was completely distressed, completely upset. So he was actually not thinking about God. He was actually calling his son to come to him. Now, his son's name was Narayana, as I said, and this name also was the synonym of Vishnu, God. In the Vaishnava tradition. It literally means the highest spiritual destiny of all spiritual seekers. Now, when he uttered his son's name, something happened in his mind. He was uttering the same name when he was a small boy. So he used to go to a nearby temple where the deity's name was Narayana, Vishnu. And he used to pray, he used to meditate. And that is why he gave the same holy name to his son. But because of his indisciplined, profligate life, he had completely forgotten his spiritual background, the training he received when he was young. But still, out of his affection, or maybe out of total distress and agony at the time of death, he called his son to his side. But immediately, he quickly remembered that was the very name that he used to utter as a small boy, because that was the synonym of God. So his thoughts for a moment went to the real Narayana, the God who preserves, who looks after the whole creation, for a split second. He did not really want to call God's name. He was trying to call his son's name. But because of the good association, samskaras, his karmasya contained a few gems, diamonds, and a lot of filth and dirt and weeds, but also a few good samskaras. Because he was brought up as a child, he was brought up as a God-fearing, pious boy. So he had done a lot of meditation, spiritual practices. So unconsciously, without his being aware of it, his mind went back to those days when, as a young boy, he used to meditate upon the real Narayana. The story, this is the psychological, the spiritual aspect of the story. The story goes further. Now, because when he uttered the name Narayana, Lord Vishnu sent his angels to bring him to his celestial region. Because if a person at the time of death thinks of God, then God will send his angels to bring him to Vishnu Loka, the abode of Vishnu. But then there was the other actions and samskaras. The Yama is the Lord of Death. He is the one who will bring all the evildoers and take them to hell and make them suffer for the evil actions he has done. And then he'll be reborn again. So there is a dialogue between the angels sent by Vishnu, God, and also the Yama, the Lord of Death. So the burden of the dialogue is this. Vishnu's angels, God's angels, tell the other servants or messengers of Yama, the Lord of Death, that any person who has sincerely prayed to God once with real sincerity, that person will be saved by God. That's the idea behind it. So the implication is this. Karmashaya is like a huge bundle. Whatever strong impressions are registered in the mind with great intensity, they will come to the surface at the time of death. That's why one of the greatest instructions in the Bhagavad Purana given by Shuka is Edavan Sankhiyogabhyam Swadharma Parinishthaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayana Smriti. So Parikshit is a king who asked Shuka, what should a dying man do? I don't want to go into those details of the story. The instruction is this: either through the practice of meditation, jnana yoga, path of devotion, a path of unselfish action, by whatever means, you should be able to leave this world with God's name in your mind and God's form in your heart. That should be the purpose of human existence. So this is possible only if we can accumulate spiritual tendencies, spiritual ideas, spiritual impressions in the karmashaya. Because karmashaya is the one that causes unpleasant experiences and also pleasant experiences. Sometimes you find in life, some people lead very wayward life. Apparently, if you analyze their actions and behavior, they don't seem to be inclined towards spiritual values or anything. And they have a good time. Some of them enjoy good life. How do you explain? It's a contradiction. There is a inexplicable contradiction in this context. Some people leading very wayward life, doing whatever they want, but they seem to be happy for the time being, at least. There's some other people who make a lot of sacrifices, do a lot of spiritual practices, but have innumerable problems, worldly problems. So how do we explain this? For the former, they have done a lot of good things in the past, which they are exhausting. For others, they have accumulated a lot of good samskaras, good actions, but also some unpleasant samskaras and through unpleasant actions, which they are now going through. That's the explanation. That's why te klada paritapa phalaha punya apunya hedutvad. So these kleshas are causing all the different consequences and experiences in life. Now we will go to some of the sutras which are complementary to this particular idea in the Patanjali system. That's why in the last class we discussed te pradiprasavaheyaha sukshmaha. We already explained this is the 10th sutra of the sadhana pada. These are all the sutras which build up, which are slowly building up the idea, the concept of karmasya, which is a distinct contribution of Patanjali system to world psychology. So we already discussed this earlier. Te pradiprasavaheyaha sukshmaha. So these kleshas, instincts, previous experiences, strong subtle impressions and samskaras that we have accumulated in the life can be eradicated only through counter evolution. Means we have to trace these effects into their real cause. Once we do that, once we understand the cause behind, then we get a conviction, oh, all these experiences are rooted in some previous causal actions, some actions which produce these effects. Once we dissolve the cause in the effect in the cause, once we trace the effect to its cause, then these subtle kleshas can be eradicated. That's the idea behind. So this particular process of counter evolution is called pradiprasava in Patanjali system. So pradiprasava can begin only when all the samskaras are being burned through the light of prajna. That's the idea behind it. So the whole process is this. Kleshas are caused by avidya or ignorance, as we already explained. Avidya, asmida, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, klesha, pancha klesha, 5 kleshas, obstructions, obstacles in spiritual life. Their subtle dimension is called samskara, their gross dimension is called vritti. The subtle dimensions, samskaras, which are deep-rooted, which could produce result in future, can be eradicated only through pradiprasava, which means counter evolution, which means dissolving the effects into action, tracing every effect to action. When something happens to us, some thought currents, vrittis, negative vrittis and impressions emerge in the mind, if we think for a moment and try to understand, analyze what caused all these unpleasant impressions and tendencies, immediately their impact, at least their ability to do damage to our mind, will be dissolved or reduced. That's the idea behind. Vrittis can be eradicated through meditation, but samskaras can be eradicated only through counter evolution or pradiprasava. We already discussed this in the previous class. So we will go to the next sutra, that is 11th sutra, dhyana heyaha tadvritteha. This also we referred to in the last. The gross dimensions, these vrittis, can be eradicated only through dhyana or meditation. So before we conclude this particular subtopic, we shall just describe different stages in the eradication of kleshas, at least according to one of the major commentators, that's Vyasa, who wrote a bhashyam on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. How do we eradicate kleshas? Stage by stage. First, we must practice what is called Kriya Yoga, Tapaswadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhana. So, these impressions, vrittis, can be weakened, neutralized, not completely eradicated, but their strength to do damage can be reduced through tapa swadhyaya ishvara pranidhana. Tapa means control of the senses. Swadhyaya means reading good books, good scriptures, imbibing good ideas, good impressions, and feeding the mind with spiritually healthy food. and again with a sense of surrender to God. Again, God here means God who lives as a spiritual reality within all of us. Not necessarily a creator God who is in very good terms with us, but who is angry with everybody. Yes, no. The God who creates a world, who is compassionate to all, God whom we can approach only by loving His creation. So, once we resign ourselves to such an Almighty God, and also simultaneously feed our mind with spiritually healthy, helpful ideas through Swadhyaya, and practice meditation and self-control, that's one way to weaken, to neutralize, to some extent, these kleshas. That's why Vyasa says, Sa Kriya Yogaha Kleshamscha Pradhanu Karoti, means Kriya Yoga, Tapa Swadhyaya Iswar Pranidhana. Tapa means concentration, self-control, self-restraint, plus associating with holy ideas, feeding the mind with spiritually healthy thought currents, and also meditation and prayer, a prayerful attitude. All these can reduce the power of vrittis, kleshas. And again, these kleshas can also be eradicated at a later stage through meditation called prasankhya. So, pradhanukridamsya kleshan kriyayogaha swayam uddipitena prasankhya agnina degdhabijavad aprasavadharminaha karishyanti. So what happens? The same kriya yoga, when combined with strong meditation, will help us to sterilize, to weaken the kleshas. And once we do that, then unpleasant thought currents will not emerge in our mind. What really happens, I shall explain in the light of ordinary spiritual experience. Once we practice meditation, focused meditation, and try to dissolve the effects into their cause through pradiprasava, and also practice kriya yoga, we come to a conclusion as to what really caused all these unpleasant impressions and tendencies in our mind. Then our buddhi vritti gets a real conviction as to why we sometimes become victims of unpleasant, undesirable thought currents. Once we achieve this, these thought currents will become almost neutralized. They may not be eradicated, because they can be eradicated only through counter evolution at a later stage. So through Kriya Yoga and through meditation, if we reach a conclusion that these thought currents, negative thought currents, ideas and concepts and thought currents which are unhealthy for spiritual life, are not good for us. Remember, it is not a conviction. It is not an intellectual conviction. It is something that we understand to be a fact. See, there are two types of convictions. Many things we get many ideas, many convictions. But those convictions are based on certain intellectual concepts that we form in our mind. They can be changed, altered, when we get a different conviction. So every intellectual cognition or conviction sometimes goes only skin deep, very superficial. A counter argument can shake or neutralize this conviction. You read a book, you listen to a lecture, and suddenly you're convinced. Intellectual conviction. And you go back your home and read a book which is different, which perhaps is written by a skeptic or an iconoclast. There are many such universal demolishers of ideas who will tell you nothing is right, everything is false. Such things, kind of iconoclastic ideas, iconoclasm, which is very damaging to human life. So an intellectual conviction can be shaken or can be countered, neutralized, because it is superficial. But there are certain things that we experience and we immediately understand that it's a fact. We cannot be shaken from that conviction. Conviction is perhaps not the right word to use. Buddhi vritti, as the buddhi vritti reaches a state of real perception. Even perception is not the right word, perhaps. We experience certain things to be not an idea or a concept, but to be a fact of life. Not an intellectual idea. A fact of life. So a fact goes far beyond an intellectual conviction. In fact, we sometimes believe in things which we are not sure about. What you are really sure about, you don't have to believe. You do not have to believe that this is San Francisco. You don't have to believe. So when we believe something, when we are intellectually convinced of certain things, there is also a possibility that it may not be true after all. Because if it is really a fact, we do not have to believe. You don't have to believe that it is 8:20 now. Because it's a fact. If you say, I believe it's 8:20, it means there is a possibility of maybe 8:25. So, what happens? Through prasankhyanam, through meditation, and through Kriya Yoga, when we reach a particular stage, we understand, well, these wrong, undesirable impressions emerging in the mind really are not desirable. They are not helpful. They are harmful to spiritual life. Once we understand this fact as a fact, then they won't come and disturb you. Very often problems arise only because we become only intellectually convinced. If somebody says, well, I have doubt, I believe in it, I have doubt. You have doubt because you only believe in it. You do not believe in anything in which you really believe. So when a person makes a statement, I believe, it only means he's making an attempt to believe. What is really a fact, we do not have to believe. It's not a concept or an idea, it's a fact. So that's what really happens in our spiritual life. When we reach that stage of inner realization of a fact to be a fact, then there is no problem. Now, again, at the next stage, what happens? Vyasa says, Kleshehi aparamrishtaha sattva purusha anyatha khyadi sukshma prajna samapta adhikara pradiprasavaya kalpishyade iti. That's Vyasa's commentary. Now, when this happens, we will have only that light of prajna. The prajna is the real knowledge. That knowledge is not a conviction, not a belief. It is not an act of the intellect. It is something that we understand to be a fact, so we do not have to believe in something that we understand to be a fact. So that's why Vyasa says, when this really happens, there will remain only the light of prajna. Sukshma prajna, that's what he says. That real prajna alone remains. This subtle prajna, it's sometimes called viveka khyati in the Patanjali system. We already explained this when we were going through the Samadhipada, the earlier sutras. And this real knowledge is untouched by kleshas. And once this happens, then counter evolution begins, pratiprasava. Means we are able to understand the real nature, the real cause of the problems of undesirable ideas emerging the mind. When we understand the real cause, not as a conviction but as a fact, then they vanish. As I said earlier, many of the problems in spiritual life exist only in imagination. As I said earlier, when we try to prepare a roadmap before we start the journey, when we try to intellectually analyze the whole path of spiritual life before even taking the first step, is a mistake. Once we really take the first step, then the second step becomes obvious to us. We try to analyze all the 100 steps before even making an effort, before making an effort to take the first step. It's really, I won't say it is foolishness, but there is no other word to use here. So that's the idea behind. So now we will have interaction for some time, and we'll continue this discussion because karmasaya and kleshas constitute some of very important concepts in Patanjali system, which really try to explain the whole mystery of human life and all the problems that we normally encounter, not only in spiritual life but in real life situations. So thank you. Now we have interaction, maybe for 10 minutes.
Can I try to think of the cause of something in the past? I run into the explanation that it is desire. It is just a animal desire, basically. The automatic and automatic perpetuates this part of life. So,
Yes. Now, as a spiritual seeker, when you try to trace these problems and you understand it's a desire that caused these problems, then you also realize that this desire is something undesirable. When you realize that desire was the cause of the problem, simultaneously you also realize that this desire is a mischief maker. And once it becomes a strong conviction that desire cannot make mischief anymore. A thief, once he or maybe she is caught, then he is in the prison. Once he is caught, he's a problem. A thief is a problem only so long as he is at large. In spiritual life, when we are able to understand, we are able to realize that the desire is the villain, because we sincerely want to understand the cause, and once you understand the desire is the mischief maker, then it cannot make any more mischief. At least you slowly try to get out of it. That's the idea behind. Even while driving, if you find a GPS system, there's a red line, then you are equipped, you naturally avoid that track. Only when you don't realize it, you get into it. That's why a problem is a problem only when you do not realize it is a problem. When you recognize a problem as a problem, then it is a lesser problem or it's a manageable problem. It becomes an insurmountable problem only when we are in the dark about it completely. We're totally unaware of its existence. So only a sincere spiritual seeker can realize, I have this and this desire. That's why I had this problem. Once you realize this, then desire is no more there. Because we try to trace it, we try to understand it because we don't want it. That's the idea. So when we realize the real desire to be the cause, we also realize that desire is something totally undesirable. And then we start our attempt to get rid of it. Yes. There was a ancient school of philosophy in India. Technically it was called Niyativada. Niyati means destiny, fate. That's the Niyativada. They call the school of Destinians, maybe in English sometimes they call it. Now, they believe that everything is predetermined. But here, the point is, we understand that the present, what we experience today, may be caused by what we have done or experienced in the past. So what we are going to experience tomorrow is in our hands. At least we can modify our future. That's why I said it is not predeterminism. Predeterminism has two approaches. One, the theology-oriented approach. God created the world, and that's one. The other one is purely philosophical analysis. So in both ways, the Karmasya doctrine is the opposite of predeterminism. Because in a way it says that we can start bringing about a change in our destiny right now. It is in our hands. But we must also remember, as I said earlier, a strong volition, a strong will is not enough, because mind may not cooperate. So that we must realize. Once we realize this, then normally spiritual seekers make intense effort and they make progress.
Swamiji, when you talk about this difference between sort of an intellectual conviction versus direct experience, is another way to maybe look at Eradicating is to sort of surrender to the idea that I don't really know the answer to these questions. Sort of these metaphysical questions that come up. We have these beliefs, but until we have a direct experience, it's just a belief. Is that a good way of possibly looking at that
Yeah.
sort of thing, or is that a ignorant way of looking at it?
Well, we cannot really believe in God if we know God. Nobody starts spiritual life with the belief in God based on experience. Most people begin spiritual life because they understand there is something that's beyond their control. A third factor. Their efforts and unknown factors, and a third factor which they feel is interference in their life. That's what really prompts a human being, a thinking human being, to seek for the unknown spiritual element in it. That's the beginning of belief. So there are two types of beliefs. I say again, we read scriptures because we do not find answers to all our questions in science and other books, so we read scriptures. So suddenly we find there are some clues, but we are not sure about it. That's the beginning of spiritual search. We ask questions, but we don't find answers to those questions in secular studies, in science, technology, or philosophy, or anything. So we turn our search to a higher level. And then as a result of this, we read some spiritual books, discuss ideas with spiritually oriented persons, holy persons. And then we start believing, but that belief is not the belief of a person who has experienced it, but that belief has got a qualitative difference in it. Because somehow we feel there is something, but we don't know about it. There is a mystery, and also there is a search for it. So that is the stage of Ishvara Pranidhana. Once we realize this, then there is no need of belief. Then we realize God to be a fact. So most spiritual seekers belong to this category. I said earlier, vikshipta state, when sometimes our mind is moving in one direction, spiritual direction. But sometimes the mind moves in another direction, opposite direction. But frequently we feel the need and relevance of turning the inquiry inward to a higher level. We don't do that unless we have some faith. You never do anything unless you have some faith. You don't do that. So we instinctively come to believe there is something higher than what the world presents before us. So that prompts us to begin search for God. And once we reach a stage, then that's a state of those who have realized. For them, it is not just a belief or a conviction or a faith. It's a fact. Sri Ramakrishna could not forget God. But most people find it difficult to remember God. See the difference? So whatever you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, whether you eat food, whether you walk, he always relates, even the most secular, so-called secular things in the world, he relates to God. He cannot think of anything or explain anything except in some way or other relating it to God. So that's because God has become a fact, much more of a fact than anything else in the world. But most spiritual seekers have some strong faith, otherwise you won't take the trouble. But that's still again the faith or the belief of a seeker. So that will naturally, and again, unless we get this conviction, at least intellectual conviction, there is some truth in that, you won't take the trouble to read and think of these things. So idea behind. So that's the idea behind. Yeah. Yes. And again, another element in it, this search gives you a kind of joy. That's one difference between search for God or spiritual value and search for anything else. The search for the higher spiritual truths gives you a kind of inexplicable joy, a sense of fulfillment, a feeling of the relevance of life, meaningfulness of life. And that is the beginning of spiritual life. That's why in the Gita, Lord Krishna gives the characteristics of great devotees. Santushta Sadadam Yogi, that's what he says. Santushta means the first sign of a spiritual seeker that he will have a kind of joy. Not the joy that you get when you get a chocolate or ice cream or money. The joy that is totally different. The joy which is joy by itself. Normally what we call joy or happiness is only the absence of its opposite. But here this joy associated with spiritual search is joy like a coin with only one side. Spiritual joy. That's what really sustains. That gives you the fuel. That's a fuel in spiritual life. Like that's what gives you energy. That's what really sustains our spiritual search. That's the idea. So I think we have just time. Thank you. So we'll continue the discussion maybe next class. Next we have class. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.